First of all, thanks for being on with us here this evening. Michael, I'd push it to you, and first of all, I'll say I'm a contractor. As I mentioned, not very big, but just generally when you're in politics, some smart aleck will send you somebody who was digited, but I'm a contractor, do slurry, and bailing. So the first thing I'd say to you, Michael, and this is coming, say the likes of myself, that wouldn't be what you'd call, you know, you'd be doing 8,000 bales or whatever, and you'd be doing for the farmers after that. I was just doing a tally up there. If 50% of your members are not eligible for grant aid, it relate to about between 30 to 40,000 farmers around the country that wouldn't have the offer of a contractor under the less system unless they buy it themselves, for the simple reason at the moment in most places, unless you're in derogation, you can spread with the splash plate, and if you go putting the new gear on the back, which you can buy, but it's awkward enough with some tankers, or what's coming more and more into play, the pipe system, where you have the reel and the pump, you're looking at an investment for a tanker at the moment, with the way they're gone up, 2,500 gallon or 3,000 gallon, you're looking at the goods of 50 grand, you're looking at 8 grand for an agitator, and you're probably looking at 50, wouldn't I be right in saying 50, 60 grand for if you get 700 or 800 metres of piping and dribble bear, the compressor, and basically the pump as well. And I envisage, and I'm going to predict this with the new regulations coming in 2025, that there'll be some contractors who cannot avail of a grant system if they're not, if this isn't brought in for them, won't be on the road in 2025. Would you agree?
I certainly would agree with that. And just an interesting aside, when we look at what happens in the Northern Ireland similar grant system, they have put a limit of 2,500 gallons on the maximum tanker that they're prepared to grant aid, whereas we down south are grant aiding far larger tankers onto farms rather than into contractor fleets. And that's something that we feel is important, and that there should be a ceiling in terms of the size of tank that's going to be grant aided onto a farm if contractors are going to be continued to be excluded.
The one thing I would say to you back, Michael, I've looked at the grant aid and it's 40,000. To be honest about it, it's 40,000 is the maximum. You get 40% of that or 60%, whichever, if you're a young farmer or not. It's not going to buy you too big of a tank if you were going 40,000 between a tank and an agitator. Would that be fair to say?
It would be. If you're going for a tank and agitator and you're going for your trailing shoe or dribble bar, like that's the kind of money you're getting into. Am
I correct in saying that there are some countries in Europe under the same EU that have facilitated the contractors in those countries? And my understanding is there's one or two that countries have facilitated the system because they understand that the farmer won't be going out. Like, to be honest about it, there isn't much point in having a 135 and putting a 2,000 gallon tanker behind it, even you get the grant for it. With no disrespect to the 135, but there seems to be different rules for different countries, and we seem to be, our department seems to be batting the whole time that it's not allowed for contractors. What looking have you done in Europe?
Well, we are part of CTAR, which is the European Contractors Association for Farm and Forestry Contractors. We also have made some applications or sought some information from Europe. And when we look at the previous TAMS grant scheme, we understand that contractors were eligible under the Agricultural and Rural Development Fund support provisions under Article 19 under the Regulation 1305/2013, and that provided a business startup for activities such as a farm contractor. But what we also understand is that it was the choice of the Irish Government authorities not to include support under Article 19 of the Irish Rural Development Programme. And we can quote from the reply to a petition which was delivered back in 2017, and it said it listed that contractors were eligible under the Agricultural and Rural Development Fund. And it said, however, and I'm quoting from the petition sent in 2017, petition number 284 of 2017, and it said, however, it has been the choice of the Irish authorities not to include support under Article 19 into the Irish Rural Development Programme. The Irish Farm Investment Scheme referred to in the petition is based on Article 17, which allows support only to farmers or groups of farmers. End of quote.
Michael, I want to ask you a question, and this is happening, you know, we're talking about climate and we're talking about low emission slurry spreading. It seems to be there's a document doing out, a final report between the Department of Agriculture on, say, anaerobic digestion, and it is at the moment is classed as an organic fertilizer once it's basically digested once it goes through an anaerobic digester's temperature. My understanding is at the moment it's classed as an organic fertilizer, which will be helpful this year. And there was a report done up with Chagas, NUIG, UCD and the Department of Agriculture where they said they would be recommending spreading it with either the splash plate or the low emission slurry spreading, basically the dribble bar, we'd call it. But there seems to be confusion in certain parts of the country where these digestives are, where now they're looking that you have the disc system and that it has to be put into the ground. Have you come across this problem arising in the interpretation by councils of how it's to be spread? And is it a worrying development? Because if you start going down that road of the disc and basically slitting it in, you're looking at a tractor nearly twice the horsepower, and say the general contractors might have 180 or 200, but if you're in tight ground, you'd have to have nearly twice the tractor. Plus, if you're in shallow soils, and if you read this report, that's the report there, there's a danger of it going down through the ground quicker if you're slitting it into it. Have you come across that problem?
We have Deputy Fitzmaurice, yeah, and it's something that we'd like some clarity on, because it appears that there's a diverse view within local authorities as to what the digestate product is, and that's not satisfactory from a contractor's perspective, and it's not satisfactory from the owner of the digester either. And in relation to slurry application using disc systems, while there are a number of them, there's a relatively small number of them in the country. One of the issues that is a very significant issue is all our soils in Ireland are derived from glacial product, so there are a lot more stone in the soil, and in many of our conditions where a slurry would be applied or could be applied or attempted to be applied using injector systems, discs, etc., they will give rise to stone damage or to stones being brought to the surface, and that farmers will not really want to have slurry spread in those kind of conditions. That's not widespread, but it is an issue in some cases. It'll also add to the cost because the process of injecting is going to be slower than a splash plate or a trailing shoe, and that's an additional problem that people have to deal with. So yes, we have come across it. We are aware of the issue, and we're trying to get some clarity as to what the department, EPA, whoever, will be able to identify the digestate product, which is a fertilizer and which has the opportunity to displace artificial fertilizers, which we all know have become hugely expensive. But this is an opportunity and we don't want it wasted.
Right. How concerned are you, Michael, with last March in 2020, March 2020, diesel was being bought at 44, 43, 40, look, it went under 40 for maybe a week. Today, it's at 92 bulk or 94 for the smaller amounts. In listening to contractors that I've been in my area and listening to, with the way diesel is going up and a carbon tax coming on it in May, there appears to be a lot of contractors now looking at where they're going, because I think we have to be fairly honest that a lot of contractors are the AIB for most of the year, that put out slurry in January, at the end of January, the middle of January, and the season opens. they'd do another bit again, and they'd be baling or silage, pit silage or whatever, and they'd be working during the year. That's not sustainable at the moment. My understanding as well is that banks, and not alone to the contractors, but I've heard an awful lot of people that would have like a working capital sort of a loan every year, that this year, for whatever reason, one of our main banks are putting them through hell on earth about it. And in your opinion, and what I'm listening to, I'll give you straight what I'm listening to, it's a lot of contractors actually looking now to see whether better to go to the building side of the building sectors, because they cannot sustain what's going on. I would have a view, and I'd push it to you, that within 5 to 8 years, with the price of diesel, with basically contractors left out the low emissions and all of that, with the price of machinery the way it's going up, and with the toughness with basically trying to, the banks and that contractors are going to get scarcer in the next 5 to 8 years, and farmers will be booking them, even though they think, you know, at the moment that won't happen. How would your view on that be?
Well, Deputy, our view would be very similar to your view, and we know that you're very close to the ground in terms of that understanding. Yes, and we'd also look, and we have mentioned it, prior to pandemic time, when we had regional meetings and we had face-to-face meetings with lots of people, we were always concerned by the number of grey heads in the room, and that is a very significant point. And we hear in a year like this year, when contractors are planning their work for 2022, and they're looking at diesel costs, they're looking at lack of labour availability, huge problem in rural areas now at the moment, and some of them are contemplating making the decision, is now the time to give it up or not. One of the problems that many have is that their assets are machines, and machines of their nature tend to be the assets that devalue over time, depreciate. So it's not always as easy to convert your assets into something if you decide to retire. But certainly there's huge concern. It's not just concern in Ireland, it's concern right across Europe through our CETA partners. But it's more significant here because our costs seem to be higher. And you're quite right, we've had quotes today from members of up to 94 cents a litre for diesel. And even a frightening prospect that diesel could go up as far as 150 a litre if we have issues on an international level over which we have no control. And in that scenario, it is just not sustainable to run a contracting business. And in order to provide the service for farmers, because farm incomes aren't going to justify dealing with the realistic charges that need to be put in place if diesel is to go to those levels. And I've just passed you over to our chairman, John Hughes, who might add further comments.
Thank you, Deputy, for the question. Yes, it's a very real fact that the grey hair brigade do take over the rooms when we used to have the face-to-face meetings, and I think the diesel is just one element of a lot of issues that have finally come to a point, I suppose, where we are now, and we've recognised them, that with the TAMs that lost, a whole lot of them that are all piled up against the agricultural contractor, possibly because we didn't make enough noise ourselves as an industry, and hopefully now we will get more recognition, and that would be a help. But just take the carbon tax on its own. I mean, that is a tax on food production. The farmer, as we've mentioned earlier, can get the carbon tax rebate on that section of the fuel, but we as professionals cannot, and it's a shame that we can't, but hopefully we'll rectify that in the near future. So I suppose you could say it's death by 1,000 cuts, but I think we're running into the 900th at the moment, and it's not too far off where we will get to the 1,000, and there will not be a resumption of this industry. My business at the moment is celebrating its 74th year in business. But there's no next generation coming on behind me to take over the business. They don't want it because there are alternatives that are cleaner, nicer, pay better. So why would you want it? So we need to build an industry that people would want to get involved in. And we need a training structure for people to come into it so they can see that there's a development going forward in the industry. And that's where we welcome the initiative to Teagasc and the Ministry for Education to do with the careers in apprenticeship. But to be honest, it's a decade too late. But I suppose better late than never. But will it be too late? Possibly. So we need to get the speed up on that and deliver sooner rather than later. I know they're talking about putting in the training for tractor and machinery equipment later in the year, but it's another stumbling block because it's late. Everything's late. Late is no good. If you're late getting the cows to the bull, you won't have a crop. You're late getting the corn in, you won't have a crop. So, late with the apprenticeship, there won't be any industry.
Last question, because I see the runners and the riders are running out of time here on the clock. I see the clock has gone to 0. If there's one message you want us to send to the Department of Agriculture and the Minister, what would your top message be? Thanks as well. Okay.
Thanks, Deputy Fitzmaurice. Our one message is we need a register of contractors. We need the sector organised and structured in order that we can develop, as John said, that we can put together programmes to allow employees and people to develop the sector. At the moment, we are the hidden asset of Irish agriculture. Nobody wants to talk to us. Nobody wants to consider the role of the contractor. They talk about farming, and most people who are even on the fringes of the sector do not consider the role of the contractor at all. It's like we are invisible in the room. Well, we're not. We're doing the work. And agriculture cannot survive and will not survive without the role of farm and forestry contractors.